All right, after a terribly inauspicious start to today, we're going to go ahead and start today's meeting of the RM54 work group, the Maryland Community Choice Pilot Program, the Montgomery County Community Choice Pilot Program. Today is June 21st, 2022. It's 10:22 this morning. We were supposed to start at 10 o'clock, but we had technology issues. Hopefully everybody is on now. And we are live on YouTube. So we have filings this morning from Montgomery County and also from the utilities. And I would like to start with Montgomery County. I apologize, but if you could start over with your presentation, that would be wonderful. So I'm going to turn it over to Lisa Brennan. Oh, is Lisa on here? She was, and
yes.
oh,
yes,
okay, great.
I'm here.
Okay, good. If Lisa, if you could go ahead and start over again, that would be wonderful. And I apologize to everyone.
Thank you very much. Do you mind bringing up the screen, Judge Grace? The document?
Oh, that's right. Yeah, just hang on one second. Okay. Can you see the document?
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Good morning, everyone. This is Lisa Brennan for Montgomery County presenting. This is the matrix of actions required. There was a draft version of this that was originally sent around by Stan Edwards at our May 24th meeting. But this is the document that we and the utilities have been working on. So just to show you what this is, basically Stan went through this entire statute and filled in what the plain language of the text is, sort of what steps are required. And then we broke it out, county CCA action versus utility action. So, you know, he and our team has filled in the county CCA action side. Utilities have gone through and filled in their side as well. There's some notes that we'll get to, but basically this should mirror the sort of steps that's required by the statute, although it's in sort of what we think is a more logical order just to put it in. And again, I would like to thank the utilities for their input on this. They've been instrumental in getting this document to the state. And Jeff Trout especially has really led the charge, and I appreciate that. Okay, so going down through the first one is just the obvious. Line 1 is just the obvious. The county can form a CCA after December 31st, 2023. And then we get into sort of the meat of it. This is from PUA 7510.3M. And for anyone who wants to follow along on the copy of the statute that has gone, I think most of us are working off a copy of a statute. That's the chapter 449. This basically starts at the bottom of page 13, and goes to the top of 14. So it talks about the CCA is deemed to have obtained electric customer authorization to retrieve pre-enrollment usage data. So that's obviously going to be one of the tasks that we have to do with the utilities, is get that data. Following procedures established by the commission, an electric company shall provide the CCA any relevant data for customers in the jurisdiction of the CCA, including, and then it just gets into the sort of the details. We have the pre-enrollment usage data. That'll be the aggregated data at this stage. Any other appropriate billing and electrical load data. That information, you know, sort of what exactly that looks like is going to be worked out between the utilities and the county and the CCA at that time. Line 2E, an electric company shall provide data to the CCA as follows. So there's only aggregate data when the county initiates the process of forming a CCA. So again, on the utility action column, that would be to provide aggregate load and other relevant data to allow the county to develop an aggregation plan. And we'll decide, that'll be determined how to provide that county level data. Next, any customer specific data after the aggregation plan is approved by the commission. Again, the utility will send a list to the CCA of all the eligible accounts, and that'll be the ones that have SOS, the retail choice supplier, and the rate classes will be included on that.
Judge Grace and Lisa, I'm sorry for interrupting. Do you want parties' comments as Lisa is going through this if we disagree with something, or would you prefer that we wait to the end?
I please feel free to ask questions or make comments as we're going through this list.
Okay, then I have a comment on, I guess it's, I'm looking at Lisa's document 2G. Lisa, I didn't mean to cut you off in the middle of a sentence.
No, that's fine. It's probably easier to go through it as, do it as we go. So I'll try to pause maybe at the end of each line longer.
The part that I have a disagreement with is where it says utility action, all accounts that have a retail choice supplier. I'm not objecting to the aggregate data, but we find that this is really in conflict with section 7510.3F, 3, little I and little 2, as well as 7510.3H. And in those sections is section F specifically, which comes before this section of Montgomery County reference. People who have a third-party supplier are considered opted out or considered to have refused to participate. And if you have refused to participate, that includes sharing your customer-specific data. So while I understand that the words say what they say in Part M, we find that this conflicts with the portion where it says the customer has basically already opted out by having signed a retail supply contract or specifically opted out. So I would just like to note that objection here.
Would it be all right if I responded?
Sure.
Before we moved on? So the CCA is going to need to have the ability to serve the load of customers who are currently served by retail suppliers. And so Fran, I assume you would agree with me that aggregated information that includes people who are shopping is information that the CCA needs.
I have no problem with the aggregated data, Jeff. Sharing.
Okay.
The problem I had was with the customer specific data.
Okay, and I don't think we're sending customer specific data for customers who are shopping.
That would be fine, except what I'm reading on the document that I received. It says under Part 2G, utility will send to the CCA a list of all eligible accounts, all accounts that have a retail choice supplier. And then in the next bullet, it says CCA will scrub the eligible list to account for opt-out responses, retail choice contracts, etc. We think those accounts should not be given the customer specific information to Montgomery County, considering they've signed a third-party supplier contract. I have no objection to the aggregated data.
This sounds to me like the sort of issue where a resolution can be arrived at that satisfies most or all parties concerned. And it also doesn't sound like one that we need to resolve today. So I think it's really good that you flagged this for later discussion. And this is a place where we're going to have to decide whether we're building a circle or a triangle or a square in order to make sure that the pegs fit in the right shape. But it doesn't strike me as a showstopper.
I agree. I just needed to note that, to know this is coming, and whether it can be handled by commission regulations or some other way, that's fine. But I know my members who are already in contracts do not want their data sent around.
Fair enough.
Okay, so Fran, you have no objection to aggregate data or whatever information about the load, if the utilities are able to know that there are, let's just use these numbers, 100 customers on retail supply and they use X load, that's aggregate data that you don't have an objection to, am I right?
Well, Lisa, that data is published by the commission already, I believe.
Okay, I just want to make sure I understand which data you're concerned
no, I
about.
have
You're
no
concerned with
objection to that.
customer-specific data that would be after the aggregation plan is approved by the commission.
Correct. I
Okay.
just wanted to note it, and if I noted it in the wrong place, I'm sorry. But
No, that's fine. I just want to make sure these are sort of two things that follow from each other, and I just want to make sure that I know which part of it you're more concerned with. I
the
appreciate
commission
it.
puts out that aggregated data. I believe it's in monthly reports, or it used to be. So
Okay.
I don't have any objection to that.
Okay. So I think we've made a note of that.
Okay.
Oh, I'll make my, Drew McAuliffe has his hand raised. I'll make my notes on a separate document.
Thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, great. I had mic issues last week. I just had a quick comment on 2D. Sorry to go back. I believe, Lisa, you stated that for the other appropriate billing and electrical load data, you said you were going to work it out at that time with the utility, what that data would be. I guess staff would have an issue with that because for writing the regs, we're going to need more specific information sooner than that. So we can write the regs, what data you will be collecting. So that's where we're kind of going back with that business plan. So we would need more specifics on that to write the regs. I just wanted to point that out.
You would need more specific data in order to finalize the regs.
Correct. But so she did state you guys would work it out at that time. So to me, that sounds like, late 2023, early 2024. So obviously that would.
I didn't mean we were waiting forever. I just meant, that's some, there are some things that don't need to be hashed out during meetings, for example. These are things that we can go back and forth as we get, as we get more information, we can go back and forth with the utilities. And this document isn't intended to be written in stone. It's a living document, I guess.
No, I understand that. I guess it made me a little nervous when you said at that time. So to me, that sounded like, in 2024, when we need this data, we'll figure it out. So just wanted to make that comment.
Okay, duly noted. All right, I'll continue on then. I guess we were at the end of 2G. So we've added some information from the staff strawman that the CCA will scrub the eligible list to account for opt-out responses, retail choice contracts, CCA applications, etc. And the CCA is going to determine that opt-out process. That's one of our responsibilities. And if contacted, because there is a part of the statute that says, if the customer contacts the utility to sign up for standard offer service. So if they contact the utility is going to direct the customer to the CCA, so that we're the ones who are sort of driving the movement to this, to the particular to the CCA or not. But Jeff, if I explained that part of the process to your recollection?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, going on to the next page. Again, this had come from the staff strawman. The CCA can request historical data for the scrubbed list of accounts. The CCA county action data may need to use non-EDI to manage transaction expenses. The utilities will use current business practices for providing historical usage, basically EDI where possible. And we've acknowledged that there's some various detail issues to be worked out over time between the county and the CCA and the county CCA and the utilities. I don't see any questions, so I'm going to move forward. Line 3A. And this is going to D. So we had been in M before, and now we're moving kind of to the previous section of the statute. This D is on, if you've got the copy of it with you. D is on page 7. So at least 60 days before initiating the process to form a CCA, the county must. And this obviously is heavily on what the county actions are. First, under D1 little I, develop an aggregation plan. And specifically, we are going to develop an aggregation plan that includes items required under 7.510.3 D2, which we'll get to. We're going to give written notice of the plan to each residential and small commercial electric customer in the county. So that's clearly a county CCA action. The utility action is to provide contact information for each residential and small electric customer in the county. And so we just made a note there that the notice goes to all residential and small commercial customers regardless of their current supplier. That's what the statute says.
Lisa, I had noted an objection, and I know we disagree about this from before. And again, providing contact information for each residential and small commercial customer. If someone has already opted out by having a contract or a specific notice of having opted out, I don't believe that they should be receiving this information over and over again. So I won't delay it now, but we do have an objection to that.
So Fran, I have a question. Right now we're on section D of 7.510.3, which is the first notice that's sent out by the county, and it's 60 days before initiating the process. And then when you made your objection earlier, you were citing F, which is the second notice. So I guess my question is, you don't want
the second notice, Judge Grace. If I spoke too early, then I'm sorry.
Okay, so
Second notice.
So you don't object to the first notice?
No, I don't object to the first notice because I have to know something's happening. I do object to the second notice.
Okay, so I think D, correct me if I'm mistaken, but D is the first notice that
Correct.
that happens. Okay,
Correct.
so
Maybe
okay.
I spoke prematurely. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I will scratch out your objection to that at that point. Okay. Anyone else have questions about that part of the process? Okay, hearing none. Publish a summary of the plan in at least one newspaper of general circulation. And that's obviously a county CCA action. The next line, line 3E, publish a full text of the plan on the website. That's part of our process as well. We're going to have to establish the CCA website and publish an aggregation plan on it. Next, we give written notice of the county's intent to form a CCA to the commission for approval. So that's also on our list of things to do. Prepare a notice of intent and submit it to the commission. Moving further down, this is now in the statute 7.510.3 D2. The aggregation plan must. Again, this is the plain language reading of it, just because I think it makes it easier. Under D2I, detail the processes related to participation in the aggregation activities of the CCA. 2(2), contain information on the operations, funding, and organization structure of the CCA. D2(3), provide details on rate setting and costs to participants, including an analysis of historical and forecasted trends in electricity prices and a purchasing plan designed to save ratepayers money. D2(3)(2), methods the CCA must use for entering into and terminating agreements with other entities. D2(3)(3), rights and responsibilities of participating electric customers. And D2(3)(4), termination of the aggregation program, if any. So again, that's all, what we're required to put in the plan.
I have another question.
Sorry?
I have another question.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So you're right. This is all the portions of the statute that apply to the first notice in D. And then it's not until we get to the second notice in F3 where it details the requirement that the county instruct customers on how they can exercise their choice, right?
Yes.
Does the county intend to allow or to inform customers in its notice under D1(2)? Does the county intend to include the M3 little I and little 2 choices on how to opt out?
So you're saying put the opt-out information in both of them? I'm not sure we're going to be set up to receive them at that point. So I think part of the notice in the later version is that then there's the process has sort of, you're adding yourself to the list.
I know that it's not required. It's not specifically required by the statute under D. It's not specifically required under the statute until the second notice in F. However, we've talked about AOBA's objection where if someone has opted out, or if, I think they said if they have a contract with another provider, that the notice in F wouldn't go out to them, the second notice. So that the D notice, which, I hear what you're saying about not being set up, that would be the only way to inform customers at that time of their ability to opt out.
Yeah, I think we could, trying to figure out how that would work. We could certainly give them information on how they, that it will be possible, that this is the, you're not, if you don't want it, you don't have to have it, kind of a thing. I don't know that we would give them the exact, send this notice in, but I don't see a problem with including information on the process, like that it will be, that you'll have the opportunity to opt out. It's a good question, Judge Race. It's something. Maybe we could. Sorry.
Can we pin it for further discussion?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we'll make a note that a process for opt out for the customers who won't get notice under F because their retail supply, right?
Yeah, if that's what we're discussing with Ms. Francis.
Right. So these two things go together in your mind, and I agree that if you're going to do one thing in F, you need to have it somewhere. So this would be the logical place. All right, we'll put a pin in that. How's that?
Perfect, thank you.
All right, so
Drew McAuliffe has his hand raised.
Yeah, thank you, Judge. No, I was just gonna say, staff did, I think if I know where your conversation's going, staff did ask that there be an explanation of the opt-out structure of the CCA in the aggregation plan. So I don't know if that would resolve the issue. So we expect the plan to at least explain how the opt-out procedure will work. It may not ask for your opt-out at that time, but it will at least explain how that process would work.
So the 7510.3D1 2 little I just requires the county to give written notice of the plan to each residential and small commercial electric customer, not to send the whole plan. So I think the timing will be right, that the county will have further details on that process, since they do have to put it into the aggregation plan. But, notices to customers are different than filing with the commission. You don't expect the customer to read, a huge long document. So that was the reason for my question. Not knowing what format the first written notice under D would take.
Okay, yeah, no, that's a good point. I guess we could put something in that notice to customers of, a web link or somewhere they could go, which would explain the process as well.
Yeah. Something just as transparent as possible.
yeah. And that is absolutely our intent, is to be as transparent as possible.
Drew, I don't have that document up in front of me, that the application document that staff presented at our last meeting. But if you have that in front of you, maybe make a note of. I don't remember if I know that you required a copy of the notice that was going to be sent to customers, but you might want to include something there with that, just pinning that for discussion.
Okay, we'll do.
Okay, thanks.
I'm sorry, I don't know where we are. I went back up in time, and now I think we are about, we've gone through D2.
Yeah, I think we're
The
at E.
application plan must include.
Yeah, I think we're at E.
Okay. Do you mean like line 4E, or
I thought we were at 5.
on
Line 5B.
5B?
Maybe I'm wrong.
No, that's fine. All right, so line 5B. So this is what's required at least 60 days after providing the notice is required on the earlier step. The county can initiate a process of forming a community choice aggregator by filing with the commission the following. So E1 little I, a notice of intent to form a CCA, which includes the name of the county in the CCA. Obviously, that's a county action or CCA action to prepare the notice of intent and submit it to the commission. We're still trying to figure out how this is different from the earlier notice required. Maybe it's just the same thing a second time.
Drew, there were some differences. I don't know where I can find that application document. I'll try to look for it, but there were some differences that staff presented last week about these two filings. Do you recall?
For the plan and then the application itself, you're saying the differences between those two?
Yeah, the filing with the commission that's required under 510.3E and the filing with the commission that's required under 510.3D.
Right. Yeah. So D is just the plan itself. So I guess the main difference would be that wasn't quite as detailed as E. So when E was filed, we were expecting there to be, actual rates in there. I think that was really the main difference. So E also includes a copy of the plan. Yeah, so for D, we were looking, for a more general overview of the CCA and, how rates will work. And then E was going to have specific rates, whether that's 10 kilowatt, cents kilowatt hour or 15 or whatever. So I think that's really the main difference, is we wanted specific rates in that E filing. There's obviously other smaller changes as well, but I think that's the main one.
So I think, Lisa, at the last meeting, staff detailed the answer to this question.
Yeah, okay, so we've got the, so looking at the language in D, I think what Drew's referring to is it requires rate setting and costs to participants, including an analysis of historical and forecasted trends and a purchasing plan designed to save the ratepayers money. So rate setting and costs to participants versus the language in E is proposed terms of service, rates, and categories of charges, fees, or any other cost to customers, unrelated to the actual cost of supply. So yeah, I do agree. So maybe we can delete that note.
I'm gonna pull up. I found it. This is the detail under that section. That the details that staff was asking for in the application under that section.
Understood. As this went back and forth between the county and the utilities and different utilities, so this went to different folks. Folks put in their notes if sometimes there was a placeholder for a question. Can I ask the utility folks who are on the line? Do you have any questions at this point? I'm not sure who, I can't see who authored this note, which is fine. As long as everybody's comfortable with it now, I'm satisfied.
Yeah, I don't have any questions at this time, Lisa.
Okay, thanks, Jill. PGE or PHI folks?
I think that PHI is good.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna go ahead and move to line 5C is where we left off. That this is at least 60 days after providing the notices, the county can initiate the process of forming a CCA by filing with the commission. So we would file a copy of the aggregation plan at that time and a draft of the county law forming a CCA. So again, that's obviously a county CCA action. And we're going to look to if there's anything in the statute on what the county law has to include, although I don't recall there being much in the statute about the local law itself other than needing one. To act as a local community code choice aggregator. So next page, starting at 5E, proposed terms of service, rates, and categories of charges, fees, or any other costs to customers unrelated to the actual cost of the electricity supply. So this is the sort of how we anticipate the rates looking. I think Stan has used the example of, that it's possible that there will be 3 rates, one that's close to current renewable requirements, one that meets the current renewable requirements, maybe one that's higher, and maybe a third one that's even more. So that would be the kind of thing we'd put in there. Moving on to 6A, this is the county is a CCA after. The commission has approved the county's aggregation plan and proposed terms, and the county enacts a local law. Obviously that requires the county to actually enact the statute, local law. And we're still looking into anything that's required by municipalities to adopt the relevant section of the county code, if they're automatically included or if they have to do something affirmative. And then going down to, now we're going to F. Sorry, it's lines, it's in the document, it's line 7A, but in the statute, we're looking at 7.510.3F. So I'm trying to follow along from home. Here we go. So based on the schedule established by the commission for transitioning customers to the CCA, provide a notice to all residential and small commercial electric customers in the county. The notice must include, and then we'll go through that in a minute, but this does require the county to prepare and provide the notice with all the required information to all residential and small commercial customers, update the CCA website as appropriate. Utility action, they would provide customer specific data to each residential and small commercial customer in the county, including an updated contact information after the aggregation plan is approved by the commission and the county enacts a local law. So the way, and I'm sure, Fran, I know you're going to want to talk about this, but the way this reads, the notice goes to all residential and small commercial customers regardless of their current supplier. And that this needs to be done after the suppliers are identified, since the information must be included in the notice. So we know that. But Fran, is this the section that you were basically referring to earlier, where you think this doesn't require to go to customers who are on a third-party supplier contract?
Yes, because we think that it conflicts with, it says what it says, so I'm not disagreeing with you that it doesn't say that. However, you have to read it in conjunction with, let me see what this is, part S3, little I, little double I, where it says that how you can refuse to participate. And if you have a contract, you are deemed to have refused to participate. So you shouldn't get caught up in the process if you have already refused to participate, or perhaps, after the first notice from the county, have written the county a letter or done what they need to do on the website in order to refuse to participate. You have to be careful, because so many of these small commercial customers are part of much larger companies, and they may have hundreds, if not more, accounts. And it's a big deal to stay on top of this. So while it sounds like you send one notice to, a corner store with, a small general service meter, you opt out, you get a second notice, no problem. For the large companies, it is a problem. And what we're talking about are large companies that are managing garden apartments, master metered apartments, etc. So that's why I'm trying to prevent all this confusion and the amount of work that it will take to keep opting out of this process. Once they know that they've got third-party supply contracts in all their buildings, they're relieved from that responsibility.
So Fran, are you saying that any residential or small commercial electric customer in the county that has, at the time the CCA is formed, already has a contract?
At the time the CCA is formed, and I guess after the first notice, has a contract. Yes.
Okay, so you're not saying new contracts,
I'm not talking
three,
about new customers at all. That's a different issue.
no, not new customers. You're not saying, do you think 2 by contracting for service with, in the notice required on this subsection, the county shall provide to the residential and small commercial electric customers in the county the opportunity to refuse to participate in the aggregation activities of the community choice aggregator by return submission, or 2 by contracting for service with a retail electricity supplier, or by choosing standard offer service from an electric company. So you're saying that 2 applies to contracts that were in existence before the CCA?
I think it applies to ones that were in effect before the CCA as well as ones that are in effect after the CCA, all equally. They're third-party supply contracts, and the penalties for a mistake or the penalties for having them canceled or the paperwork necessary to change it after you found out that somebody switched you 60 days later, it's a nightmare for these companies.
I understand, but
That's what we're trying to prevent. Yes, we consider them whether the contract was in effect prior to the aggregation or after the aggregation, before the notice, first notice, or after the first notice. Most of the people who are third-party suppliers that I know that are AOBA members, they keep renewing their contracts. They just don't end. So
right.
they just keep going. So that's how I'm envisioning it. Because that's just what how these companies behave.
Fran, F3 2 says by contracting for service with a retail electricity supplier or by choosing standard offer service from an electric company. Wouldn't 3 apply to all residential and small commercial electric customers in the county? It would apply to everyone.
Correct.
Because everyone either has standard offer service or retail electricity supply before the CCA goes into effect.
Well, this specifically says choosing standard offer service from an electric company. That's different than having standard offer service as, quote, the default supplier. Right now, you choose a third-party supplier. It's a proactive choice. You don't proactively choose SOS. If you're not with a third-party supplier, you default to SOS. Well, now we're doing it differently. Now you have to proactively choose standard offer service the same way you would choose a third-party supplier. So I read this as being different from the status quo that we're in now. Because right now, nobody's choosing standard offer service. They just get put on it if they don't have a contract.
Okay, I understand now.
So I read that differently. I think a customer would have to go saying, whether to the utility or Montgomery County, I'm on standard offer service. That's my choice. Don't switch me. That's a proactive step. The way I read the law and going along with as it was being drafted, if you have a third-party supply contract, you don't need to do anything. You're out. You don't need to worry about it, because that was one of the big worries with AOBA with this legislation, was what would be happening to my members.
But they would still get the notice.
They're getting the first notice, but it sounds no big deal. You get a notice, you opt out after the first one. For many of these members, this is a big deal, having to opt out for all of these accounts.
But this is the second notice.
I don't think they should be receiving the second notice. I think they should be considered opt out. They're opted out already.
I think it's both. I think they get the notice because the statute specifically says they have to send the county or its supplier has to send to all residential and small commercial electric customers in the county the notice, and it's going to say, it can certainly say that here's how you can refuse to participate. If you've already contracted as the service with the retail electric supplier, you are opted out.
I think we just disagree on who gets the second notice, but I don't think they should have to proactively do anything at all if they have a third-party contract. If they have a third-party contract, they don't need to change anything they're doing. All they need to do is throw that first notice in the garbage.
So Jeff, you said earlier that you thought this could be worked out.
Definitely.
I think, Jeff, do you feel like, how do you see this being worked out? The county feels like the requirement under F1 is to send written notice to all residential and small commercial electric customers in the county. And Fran doesn't want that notice to go to anyone who's already under contract. How do you see that working out?
All right, well, it was a different issue where I thought that we could work it out, which was the substance of the information to be exchanged. But I might as well jump in on this issue because where the General Assembly has said the county shall give this information to arguably to everybody, and the representatives of certain of the customers are saying that they're opted out and they want to stay opted out. I don't see those as irreconcilable positions, because what you're doing is you're sending information. You're not asking the customer to do anything with the information. Other than, as Fran said a few minutes ago, toss it away. And yes, it may for most customers be a waste of paper, but people change their minds over time about what they want to do. And so if the General Assembly has said at point X in the process, you send Y notice to everybody, I don't see any reason, I certainly don't see any legal basis not to send it, and I don't see any practical reason not to send it, because the interests of many of the customers to not have the piece of paper that they have to then throw out is outweighed by the interest of the handful of customers who will have changed their minds between the first notice and the second notice. So I think that's how you reconcile it, which is that you make sure that the notice is clear, that it says if you've already opted out, your opt-out is good unless you change it, and you further say something in there about this doesn't require any action by you, but I don't think you can get around sending the piece of paper. I think Fran's needs can be addressed, her concerns can be addressed by the contents of the notice, but I don't think you can get around the statutory requirement to send the notice.
Okay, Drew, I see that you have your hand raised, but give me just a second. So Jeff, tell me if I'm hearing you correctly. I think what you're saying is that the second notice needs to go out to all customers, but that folks who already are contracted by a retail electricity supplier qualify as having opted out without having to do more.
I believe both of those statements are correct and are consistent with the plain language of the statute.
Okay, Drew.
Yeah, I was just going to say exactly that. That the second notice you could easily put on there that if you're currently, supplied with a retail supplier, there's no action to take. I think that's the easiest thing to do, because that first notice doesn't give any opportunity for opting out. It's just saying, hey, we're doing a CCA. It doesn't really say anything else. So I think you could easily just state, if you have a retail supply, you don't have to do anything. You're opted out, and that'll be that. So I agree with Jeff.
Does anybody else want to weigh in on this issue?
It would have to be, this is Fran, again, I'm just going to state I don't agree, but because I think it's in conflict with another section. But if that's the way that this group goes, that notice would have to say, this notice does not apply if you are under a third-party contract. You are considered opted out. It would have to be right up front, bold, and put out there, and not buried in the bottom of paragraph 3. Because, you know, another thing with these large companies, what happens is these notices are sent to bill paying departments. They're not sent to the people who are contracting for the service. The people who are contracting for the service are in a different part of the organization. And there is not that kind of communication where someone who's paying the bill and may make a decision or may do something that is made by somebody in a totally different position. So when you start to see where the notices are sent, they're sent to management offices. These are not sent to the people who are making the decisions or even have knowledge of the fact that there are third-party contracts in place and how long those contracts last. So what I just don't want is for somebody to check off a box or think they're doing something good because they get a notice that says more renewables or less expensive rates, checking off a box, and all of a sudden the member gets hit with penalties from his supplier. That's the problem you need to avoid.
Jeff Trout has his hand raised.
Sorry, I'm okay. Now I'm off mute, I think. So, Fran is making some excellent points, and they go to how we're going to implement this in practice. I don't think we have to write the notice today or even this calendar year. But when we get around to crafting the notice, which is primarily going to be a county function or a CCA function, I think everything that Fran said needs to be taken into consideration, and it needs to be made. Two things need to be made clear. One is that if you've already opted out, and you haven't changed your mind about opting out, this notice doesn't apply to you and you can throw it away. But the other thing that needs to be made clear is for the presumably small population of entities that might have changed their mind between the first notice and the second notice, which is basically that they have the ability to opt in, so they might not want to throw the notice away. And in any case, you want to err on the side of giving people information rather than not.
Yeah. I think that makes sense, Jeff.
Okay, I get that we're not writing the notice now, but we are going to be drafting regs and a report to the commission within the next 6 or 7 or so months. So I just wanted to get the issue ironed out with regards to what the general feel is from all of the parties about this issue. But I think I've taken notes, and if anybody else has any. Montgomery County, do you agree that parties who have contracted with a retail electricity supplier before the CCA goes into effect have opted out?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, it was not our intent to switch anyone who's currently on a third-party contract.
Okay.
That's our understanding, and that hasn't changed. So the fact that they have contracted, means they don't get switched.
Okay, so it sounds like there's a general consensus on this issue except for AOBA. But AOBA's objection is more on the notice. Okay. Okay, thanks. I just wanted to get all of that straight for the report. You can, I'm sorry it took so long, guys. You can go ahead, Lisa.
Okay, so 7B, I think, is where we're at next. The identity of any selected electricity suppliers, that's again a CCA county action that we select a supplier or suppliers. Utility action, supplier registers with PSC and or utility as needed, and the supplier and the utility test EDI as needed. So they've expanded on this a bit. I think these were the utility notes. The step will be completed prior to requesting usage data if supplier is not currently active in Maryland. Supplier needs to be active with the utilities retail choice systems. Existing supplier needs to set up a DUNS +4 in order to track CCA load separately. And if the CCA contracts with multiple suppliers serving the CCA in a service territory, there could be additional coding changes needed to the utility systems. Questions? Going once, going twice. 7C, also required information is, or the CCA is county is a CCA after giving this notice that also includes the terms and conditions of service. I think that's pretty straightforward. Next page, 7D. New rates, charges, and fees for service under the Community Choice Aggregator. And this is something we've discussed, is sort of at what point are the rates given. But I think we came to a conclusion last time. Questions? 7E. Comparison of the new rates and the rates under the current standard offer service. The county CCA action, we note that this is a responsibility of us, but that the utilities are going to provide information on the best way to direct customers to access SOS rates. The SOS rates vary by territory. SOS rates are generally found on the utilities website as well as the PSC's Maryland Choice website. So that's just the details of how to get the information to the customers, but we acknowledge that that is a communication that we will undertake. Moving on to line 7F. Information on how to access the standard offer service available from an electric company. This is basically what we talked about above. The communication of this is the CCA responsibility. The utilities will provide information on how a customer can choose SOS from their utility. And again, accessing SOS may vary by service territory. 7G, the total renewable component of the electricity to be supplied through the CCA, including the specific source of any renewable energy compared to the requirements of current law, if any. That's pretty straightforward. We should be very happy about including that information, I suspect. All right, now we're going to change gears a little bit and go to line 8A. So this is the residential and small commercial customers can refuse to participate in the CCA by. And the county will establish processes and systems to track responses from potential CCA customers regarding their participation in the CCA. And taking a line from the staff strawman, the CCA will scrub the eligible list to account for opt-out responses, retail choice contracts, CCA applications, etc. So they can do this either by notifying the CCA or their electric company that they do not want to participate in the CCA. Utility will use existing retail choice procedures for switching customers from the CCA if after the switch to the CCA. Or contracting, this is what we've just gone through, the contracting for service with a retail electricity supplier or choosing SOS from their electric company. So that's how they refuse, that's how they don't participate. I think we've established that. Going to 9A. A residential or small commercial electric customer is deemed to have given permission to the county to act on the customer's behalf when the customer explicitly grants permission to receive service from the CCA, they apply to receive service from the CCA. For customers receiving SOS, if a response is not received to the notice required under 7510.3F within 30 days, and the customer has not contracted with a retail supplier or contacted an electric company to select SOS. And then going back to, oh, and if the customer contacts the utility to select an SOS, the utility directs the customer to contact the CCA and let them know that this is their choice, so that we have that information. This goes back to sort of when the switch will happen, that the CCA is directing it. Jeff, am I correct that that was the main concern there?
David Hoppick also has his hand raised. Jeff, if you're talking, you're muted.
So, yeah, my question here is, you know, per the statute, you can opt out by telling the utility. But it sounds like what's being proposed is if you tell the utility says, okay, here's how you contact the CCA to opt out or to select something. So is the proposal to kind of create a two-step process? Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, this is Bev. I think so, to avoid the, if the customer contacts the utility, then the utility would have to send lists. I think we came to the conclusion that it was just simpler to have the utility direct the customers to the CCA and have the CCA just maintain that list of opt-out customers instead of having potentially multiple lists and, people falling through the cracks.
So following up on that, I think the alternative would be to, if the utility received somebody who said, no, I want SOS or I don't want the CCA, and the CCA enrolls that customer, the utility would send back a notice of some kind to the CCA saying, no, this customer contacted us, that's why we're rejecting that enrollment. So you don't want to do that.
Well, then that would require us to do additional programming to maintain that in our systems. And I think, again, we are trying to limit things.
Okay.
And the other reason we don't want to do that is that we want the CCA to be the entity that controls the communications that lead to a customer opt-out
Yep.
to the maximum extent possible.
So related to this, though, like it seems like you're going to be getting third-party supplier enrollments kind of while all this is going on, right? So if you're, getting, like, I kind of understand how this, I think I understand how this would work for SOS, but if a third-party supplier enrolls the customer, and like that enrollment kind of comes in just before the CCA submits its enrollment for that customer, like it seems like you have to do that blocking mechanism in that instance. Am I wrong about that?
So the scenario, David, is that just before we send the list to the CCA, somebody enrolls with a supplier and we need to catch that. I think as a matter of general analysis process, that would be right. There may be practical limits to our ability to keep the list up to date to the second.
Yeah, agreed. So I think it's more after you send the list to the county, and you know the 30 days have passed, the county starts its enrollment process. I'm assuming there are some enrollments for third-party suppliers that are going to come in for some of those same customers. I think that's like it's hard to foresee a mechanism where you don't have to reject at least some CCA enrollments because a customer enrolled with a third-party supplier, right?
Well,
Because with SOS, you can tell them, you like with your mechanism, okay, that's fine, great, you want SOS, tell the county. But if a supplier sends an enrollment, you have the enrollment, you have to process it.
So are you suggesting that we send rolling updates to the county of who enrolls with third-party suppliers up until the time that the CCA launches?
I don't think so. I was more thinking that if you're getting enrollments by third-party suppliers, you would, because there might be challenges with timing in terms of updating the CCA continuously, you would like reject an enrollment by the CCA because there was a third-party supplier enrollment. And I'm talking about the initial enrollment. I think you would otherwise like.
Oh, you're saying we should implement with respect to the CCA, because the CCA is a supplier, albeit a different kind of supplier, that during the period prior to the launch of the CCA, we exercise the last in rule. So we, in effect, reject the customer's choice of the CCA in favor of their subsequent choice of a different supplier.
I think so. I think I might need to, yeah, I think I might need to think this out a little bit more, but it seemed like you wanted to not have to ever reject a CCA enrollment. And I think potentially that's doable for SOS because you can tell the customer, if you want SOS, please tell the county that. But yeah, for retail supply, it seems like that's where it gets tricky. I'm not sure I have a solution right here and now, but that's I'm trying to flag that issue, I guess.
I think that's a good issue to flag, David. And yeah, we need to think about that too, and whether that is something that our existing programming may accommodate. And so it's not a problem. But I think we all should take that issue back and think about its practical implications.
Thank you.
All right, so that seems more like something that we can fight another day on that. After everyone sort of has a chance to ponder the ramifications?
Yeah, it may not be a fight, it may not be an issue at all, but I think we all need to think it through.
Gotcha. Okay, so under 9F, we've got a reference to the staff straw man. The CCA will send enrollments via EDI. Part of that is no more than 10,000 accounts per day unless otherwise mutually agreed upon. CCA should use GAGG indicator on EDI enrollment transaction. I believe that was added by the utility folks because I don't know off the top of my head what a GAGG indicator is.
Yeah, what is that? Anybody?
All right, this is beyond me.
Who wrote it?
Hi, hey, it's Valerie with Potomac Edison. I think that was just to say that it would be helpful to the utility to know if they're on a government aggregation when they set up the enrollment so that we can, if we ever have to do any, data analysis or whatever.
Okay, thank you.
So that's something that usually exists already, and so you're asking us to just do it like a third-party supplier would, or?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, it's already there.
Okay, all right, so this is something that is possible and not. And then just no earlier, the request was basically that the information come basically no earlier than Monday, September 25th, 2024 for service beginning on Sunday, October 1st, 2024, because of the timing of the switch, correct? I'm trying to see if something was cut off on the electronic version here. So hang on one moment while I open. Doesn't look like it though, yeah. Is there more to this box? Jeff / Valerie / anybody? This is just a question of the timing of when you get the receive the requests for these big data chunks, yes?
Yeah, it does look like there's something that got chopped off there. We'll figure out what it is and add it back in.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Top of page 7, line 9G. Okay. On applying for new electric service within the territory served by the CCA. So this is a little bit of the next phase of the process, but since it was in this part of the statute, we've put it in this document. This may end up being, by the way, we've actually talked about this being 2 documents, sort of the pre-launch to post-launch periods. It may end up being one larger document. We're just kind of seeing what makes the most sense after we do get into the weeds. So unless the customer has contracted with a retail electricity supplier for service or contacted an electric company to select SOS, they're going to be with the CCA. The county's actions, CCA actions. CCA obtains customer information from an FTP site. Still working on, sort of how often that information will be retrieved and what the education process is, and will it need to be different in the initial enrollment process from the later process. Utility action. Customer calls utility to request new service. Seamless move rules apply. Utility posts customer information to the FTP site. And then the FTP site needs to be developed, and whether that's going to be all utilities on one FTP site or some variation on that. And there was just a note that the utilities need to update the supplier coordination agreements for confidentiality of customer specific data. Or may need to, I guess, more specifically. So for the folks who've already contracted with a retail electric supplier, the utilities will provide information to the CCA on customers that contract for service, basically our third-party supplier contracts, so that way we can scrub them. And that's going to be included on the FTP seamless moves. And again, if they contact the electric company to select SOS, the customer is going to be referred to contact the CCA to let us know that that's their choice, so we can opt them out. And then per the utility CCA enrollment proposal that we had talked about earlier, the CCA will send enrollment via EDI. Enrollment can't be prior to the move-in date. There's going to be discussion about how will move be tracked and held by the CCA, and is there a new rejection code needed while it's pending. The utility system enrolls customers based on current rules, accelerated switch and last in. And we may need more discussion on how that last in works. Under 7.510.3H, except for a contract that renews automatically at the end of a contract term with an electricity supplier, a residential or small commercial electric customer in the jurisdiction of the CCA shall be automatically enrolled as a participant unless in the CCA, unless the customer either gives written notice declining to participate in the CCA, or contracts for service with a retail electricity supplier, or contacts an electric company for standard offer service. So at that point, the utility would provide information to the CCA on customers that contact them for with a retail supply contract, or that they want to select SOS. And again, for SOS, the customer is going to be referred back to the CCA. And last but not least, other considerations. That the assumption is the collection and billing processes will remain unchanged. Details about customer inquiries to be worked out between the CCA and the utilities. And that is the end of the very detailed process that we have thus far.
Does anybody have any questions or anything that they want to go over in more detail? Okay. Taylor also shared a document with the group on debt treatment. Do we want to move on to that? Let's see.
Your Honor, we can certainly do that, but do we have on the agenda today to circle back to the question of beginning the process of drafting the regulations?
We do. I was gonna turn to staff after after going over the bad debt document.
Great, I'll be quiet.
I'm having trouble pulling it up. Give me I'll probably take 1 minute.
Judge, this is Tyler Wolverton from Pepco. I can run through it.
Do you want control, or do you want me to pull it up?
I can do it. I got it up on my screen.
Okay, so
See if I can see if it works though.
let me find your name. I gotta give you the access.
Yep.
Okay, you should have access
Okay.
now.
Okay. Here.
It worked. You might want to increase the size.
Okay.
Much
Is that a
better.
little better?
Yeah.
All right, cool. Okay, so thanks for giving us an opportunity to talk about this. So I don't think it was the last meeting. I don't even think I was on the last meeting, but maybe a couple meetings ago, we had a discussion around the bad debt like how are we going to collect bad debt expense or uncollectible expense or write-offs? I'm going to use those three kind of interchangeably. From CCA customers, remaining SOS customers, how are we going to deal with the transition period? How will we make sure that, you know, at the end of the day, we're recovering the right amounts from the right customers? So that's the purpose of this document, is to go through a few potential ways that could work, and you know, some pluses and minuses to each way. So that's kind of the background here. Any questions on that just before I kind of jump into this? Okay. So just some assumptions going into this document that I think are helpful to lay out. First is that the utility will conduct the billing function on behalf of the CCA, i.e. utility consolidated billing, meaning, you know, we'll do this kind of the same way that we do retail supply right now, where this is not going to be a supplier consolidated billing situation in this instance. Montgomery County residential and small C&I customers will be transitioned. I said starting here. I don't know all the this may be specified in that document that we just went through, exactly how this transition is going to work. Just October 2024, just kind of a ballpark date for the purposes of this document. Maryland utilities will have outstanding accounts receivables for CCA customers as of the October 24 transition date. So if you think about it, October 1, 2024, let's say we transition a significant number of customers or right around that date from SOS to the CCA, there will be accounts receivable that we need to collect for those same customers from their SOS product prior to October 2024. Some of those are going to be delinquent, like they're late. Some of them aren't. Some of those customers will be current, but on that date, there will be receivables for those customers that are related to SOS and not the CCA. So what will happen is we'll collect that AR over the billing cycles subsequent to October 2024 as those customers pay their bills. Some of those accounts are going to have greater past due balances than others, and inevitably, some of those accounts will ultimately be disconnected for various reasons, including non-payment over the months, you know, after October 2024. So CCA customers who get disconnected, say in March of 2025, some of the revenue that those customers, or some of those bills that will ultimately be kind of written off, are going to be related to CCA payments that they owe. But if they haven't paid their bills for a while, some of the you know, accounts receivable that we'll be writing off related to those customers will be for SOS, kind of predating October 2024. Any questions there? That's kind of a important concept for folks to understand, that, you know, if a customer has outstanding payments that they owe us and they flip over to the CCA and they're not paying their bills, we're going to have to kind of, you know, some of what's unpaid will be related to the standard offer service product, and some will be related to the CCA. Okay. Another fourth assumption here: bad debt costs related to standard offer service are currently collected through the uncollectible component of the standard offer service administrative charge. Those are an estimate of write-offs over the next 12 months. And that charge is currently, like within a utility, like for Pepco, it's assessed to all SOS customers the same way, meaning like, well, all SOS customers within a rate class the same way, like residential. Doesn't matter if you're in Prince George's or Montgomery County, you pay the same administrative, like residential administrative charge. Okay. Assumption 5, bad debt costs related to retail supply service are currently included as part of the purchase of receivables discount rate. Those bad debt costs are similarly an estimate of write-offs over the next 12 months. And the charge is basically, it's the same. There's a discount rate for all retail suppliers for the different types of customers that they serve, but it's not like there's a different discount rate for one supplier to the next. If you are two different suppliers both serving residential customers, you're both going to be subject to the same discount rate for when we purchase your receivables. Why don't we skip over this last thing? I don't know if I'm not even sure what I meant when I put number 6 on here. I'll have to go back and think about it after I go through the rest of these. I think it's just the idea of if customers are swapping, kind of flipping back and forth between the CCA and SOS and the CCA and retail suppliers, it could get a little complicated to kind of track exactly where their receivables should go, and kind of making sure that customers are paying. We're not unfairly having one group of customers pay for somebody else's bad debt. That's kind of the idea here. Okay. So I have 3 methods here that I've sort of laid out. One, and it's all around kind of how do we assess these bad debt costs to CCA and SOS customers over the, I'm calling it the transition period, but what that means to me is kind of like the first year after October 2024. So like, think of it like October 24 to September 25. The first method, I'm calling it the transitional method. We can doesn't really matter what it's named. I'll talk about that I'll talk about that first. Then I have a method that I'm calling the admin charge method. And then I have another method here that I'm calling the POR discount rate method, and I'll talk about each of them. Okay. So, and feel free to stop me if you have questions. So under this transitional method, basically what we would do is starting October of 2024, we would calculate separate Prince George's County and Montgomery County SOS administrative charge for the uncollectible component. The Prince George's County charge would be based on Prince George's County write-offs divided by Prince George's County usage. So that would be, a Prince George's County uncollectible admin charge for SOS customers. And then Montgomery County would be based on Montgomery County write-offs divided by Montgomery County SOS plus CCA usage. And this charge would be assessed to Montgomery County SOS and CCA customers during year 1 of the CCA. And the thought would be, as time goes on, the write-off portion of this Montgomery County charge throughout year 1 will go down, and this charge would get smaller kind of throughout that first year, because there would be less Montgomery County SOS write-offs as those customers flip over to the CCA. And then at the same time, starting October 1, 2024, you also calculate a Montgomery County CCA POR discount rate. At first, that rate would probably just be 0, because there would really be no reconciliation factor, there would be no interest, there would be no bad debt. But you would update that rate a couple times throughout the year, and as time goes on, there would be basically, you would see write-off activity related to CCA and not SOS. And that would kind of increase that POR discount rate throughout the year. So what you would kind of have here is you would have Prince George's County customers are sort of held harmless because we're setting a Prince George's County SOS admin charge for uncollectibles based on their specific write-offs and usage to develop the rate. And then Montgomery County, what you basically would have is an administrative charge that collects uncollectible costs that goes down throughout year one. And then you would have a POR discount rate that starts at 0 and goes up throughout year one, so that you're kind of always collecting the right. It sort of matches the uncollectible, the write-offs with the correct recovery mechanism, so that we're not charging the CCA for SOS related write-offs and through a discount rate, and so that we're not kind of disadvantaging Prince George's County customers and making them, potentially be on the hook for Montgomery County SOS write-offs. So, kind of benefits to this approach, it is kind of what I just said. It closely aligns with actual accounts receivable activity. I think it creates not much, if any, cross subsidization between Montgomery County and Prince George's, which I think is especially important for Prince George's here. And I know that this is focused on Pepco. Frankly, that's intentional because we have the biggest, obviously Montgomery County is half of our service territory. But I think this would mostly apply to BGE and Potomac Edison, but those folks can certainly weigh in. It would only charge the retail supplier or the CCA for their own write-offs, and it uses methods that already exist in terms of the administrative charge and the POR. There are some complexities with this approach. I think this, for Pepco, I am fairly certain that this is not as much of a complexity, this first one around tracking Montgomery County specific AR all the way through to write-offs. I think we have the ability, I'm told by our accountants, to look at Prince George's versus Montgomery County specific write-offs. I think one thing we might want to consider, and this is something that I didn't get into this document, would be, instead of everything being Montgomery County versus Prince George's County, maybe it should be more SOS versus CCA. But we can, this is really more just kind of broad strokes. So I know BGE wanted to investigate this a little bit. For Pepco, I think that we have this ability right now in this first thing to track the write-offs by county. And then there would be a little bit of billing system work for us to be able to charge a administrative charge, just the uncollectible component, to Montgomery County CCA customers. It would be kind of, we already have the administrative charge. It would be, you'd have to change some logic to have an uncollectible component of the administrative charge assessed to this certain group of customers for a certain period of time. I wouldn't think that would be insurmountable, but I definitely don't want to speak on behalf of BGE and P with that one. So I'll pause there before I get into the next two methods, see if anybody has any thoughts, questions, comments.
So Tyler, this is Dave. I did have a question on this transition method. So, and it's like after you make the split between PG and Montgomery County. So once you've made the split to Montgomery County, I was thinking that, you're kind of always paying down a bucket of uncollectibles, right? And let's just say initially that bucket is $1 million, right? But quickly customers who are on SOS are then being enrolled by the CCA. So like looking at where you have, Montgomery County charge based on Montgomery County write-offs divided by Montgomery County, okay, SOS and CCA kilowatt hour. Is this, because I was worried that like what you're dividing by would get smaller and smaller and smaller very quickly.
Yeah, the idea would be to kind of have that charge be for all of the Montgomery County KWH, at least for that first year, so that the charge does kind of drop down as the PO, and then the POR discount rate would ramp up. So that was the idea, to kind of deal with that. I do think, the idea would be sort of year 2 of the CCA. I think you would hopefully have some kind of, you've then at that point, things look more normal. The CCA would have a POR discount rate, and remaining SOS customers, whether they're in Montgomery County or Prince George's County, you're just kind of setting the administrative charge the way that you always have, based on SOS write-offs and SOS usage. It's just kind of this period where you've got kind of a blend of different receivables that you gotta kind of deal with.
Okay, so that's helpful. My question though, and kind of how I was thinking this would have to work, was like if you're dividing it by SOS plus the CCA kilowatt hour, the admin rate, like it's not going to go very high because you made the denominator small, but like the actual revenues coming in are going to be, I would think, going down very quickly. And I always thought of like write-offs as something that happened in the past, and we're always kind of like trying to catch up to write-offs that have come through the system. Now we have to pay them off. I was thinking, and maybe I'm wrong about this, that at some point you would need to transfer some amount of the SOS uncollectible cost to, for example, the POR rate, just because of that time lag.
Well, that's what we're trying to kind of avoid here with the way that we're doing this one. So with this transition method. So you see here, the second bullet, this charge would be assessed to basically all Montgomery County SOS and CCA customers during the first year. So it's not like you would only charge SOS customers this charge. It would go to all SOS and CCA customers during the first year. And yes, it would get lower as the year goes on, but that should be made up by the fact that the POR, if we can update the POR discount rate a couple times during maybe 2, 3, maybe 4 times during that first year, and kind of keep ramping up the discount rate to a more normal level, that should get you so that we're, the right customers are generally paying the right level of uncollectibles throughout that first year.
Okay, no, that makes more sense. I think I didn't catch that it would be assessed on both a SOS bill and a CCA bill.
Right.
Okay. Okay. I see. I follow now. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. I'll keep going, just, in the interest of time. The next thing I have here, I said I'm calling it the administrative charge method. So the idea here would be there is no like real transitional, there wouldn't be like a kind of a decreasing admin charge and a increasing POR discount rate during that first year. Basically, throughout that first year of the CCA, you would continue to charge CCA customers the uncollectible component of the Maryland SOS admin charge for year 1 of the CCA. You'd basically, we'd just continue all the same normal process we have right now. I think the SOS admin charge gets trued up about every 4 months. And you'd even though these customers are on the CCA now, they would, everybody'd have to agree to this, but they would, we wouldn't purchase the receivables at a discount during that first year, we would just charge these customers the uncollectible component of the admin charge during the first year of the CCA. So the benefits here is it's you know, this is pretty simple, pretty straightforward. You know, it doesn't differentiate between Prince George's County and Montgomery County uncollectible cost. That might not be a huge deal. It does not recognize that Montgomery County SOS related write-offs will decrease during year one as those customers basically flip to the CCA. I think that this would ultimately get picked up in the true up for the admin charge. So it would, you know, that would, it would get kind of addressed, though. That would result in a reduction to the uncollectible component of the admin charge over time during year one. That would result in a kind of a cash under collection for the utility. Though, you know, I think the idea would be then, I think, when you set the POR discount rate for year two, for the CCA, you would kind of start with a reconciliation factor that included whatever your actual CCA write-offs were in year one. So you sort of, you know, ultimately you get, we would be made whole. The dollars would come out of the right buckets. It would just be a little bit, there would be a little bit of timing issues, I think. Again, this is like the same thing that we said before. This would require a little bit of billing system work to assess non-SOS customers with the uncollectible component of the admin charge. So I you know, I think it's doable. It would be some work, and we'd have to talk to our more technical folks that make the billing system changes on how big of a deal that is. But having done a number of these things in the past, I would think it's a doable amount of work. So that's that one. I'll kind of stop there. I don't know, Dave, if you had any questions or anybody else does. Okay. So then the last one here, and there may be other ways to do this. This is just sort of what I came up with, and with the other utility folks, would be what I'm calling the POR discount rate method, which, you know, the transitional method, you've got a decreasing admin charge and an increasing POR discount rate. The admin charge method, you've got an admin charge in year one and kind of no POR discount rate for the CCA customers. Under the POR discount rate method, you basically have no admin charge for the Montgomery County CCA customers, but you would start with a POR discount rate, including bad debt from day one. So basically, starting October 1 of 2024, we would purchase receivables from the CCA at a discount, which included some estimated amount of POR CCA uncollectible costs. That could be, I guess it could be the same discount rate that we charge other retail suppliers in Maryland, or it could be something unique for the CCA. Personally, I think over time we would probably want to have a unique discount rate for the CCA, but maybe in the first year it doesn't make sense because we don't have any data. Benefits, again, this is simple, very simple, uses an existing method. I don't think this really requires any back office stuff from like a billing perspective, because we already do this. Maybe if we had a unique discount rate for the CCA. Issues with this approach, my concern here would be that I think it's likely that under this type of approach, Prince George's County customers would end up kind of being on the hook for Montgomery County SOS bad debt, or SOS write-offs via the admin charge. There might be a way to deal with that if folks really like this approach that we could think about and talk more about. But the reason is because, like I said earlier, the SOS, like the admin charge includes all SOS write-offs. And as SOS customers flip to the CCA and if we have to disconnect those customers and write off their accounts, some of those write-offs are going to be related to SOS and some are going to be related to the CCA. To the extent that like a Montgomery County customer is written off and they had a lot of SOS accounts receivable, that would then get into the remaining, that would just be assessed to remaining SOS customers, which are mostly going to be Prince George's County customers. So you end up with Prince George's County customers potentially on the hook for Montgomery County SOS bad debt. Might not be much of an issue for BGE and Potomac Edison, just given that, and I don't want to speak, I'm not really speaking for them. This is just me speaking, just given that they have a smaller kind of percentage of Montgomery County customers versus the rest of their service territory. For Pepco, I would think this is this could be a big issue for Prince George's County customers. So anyways, that's a potential issue with this kind of approach. Also, that POR discount rate would likely over collect year one, kind of like CCA write-offs, or the other way to say that would be, if I'm the retail supplier that the CCA, signs up with, I might not really think it's fair for you guys to kind of charge me a discount rate on the purchase of receivables right up front, because like you don't even have any receivables yet to really, you have no history of write-offs, and there's nothing, you don't have any like delinquent receivables from the CCA at that initial point. And then again, this is the last thing there, kind of that some complexity potentially around tracking write-offs all the way through to county. But I'm fairly confident that's not a huge issue for Pepco. I think we have that ability already. So that's kind of the third option. The last meeting, we really only talked about the last two, the admin charge method and the POR discount rate method. We kind of came up with this transitional method, which is kind of a blend of the two between the last time we talked about this and this time. So this one does have a little bit more like billing system complexity, but I think it provides maybe a little better matching and a little less potential subsidy. But frankly, I think any of these could work. And even this last one, there's probably something we could do here to make sure that Prince George's County doesn't get disadvantaged. I think I would just need to think about it a little bit more. We'd have to make some kind of a change to how we true up the admin charge for remaining SOS customers, and maybe just do some kind of a charge for the CCA. I think at that point it starts to look kind of like this transitional method. But anyways, go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, so for the POR method, could you maybe solve some of the issues and try and avoid any like PG County customers paying Montgomery County SOS by like allocating some SOS uncollectible costs that are for customers that have migrated to the POR discount rate calculation? So you almost, I was kind of thinking of this one as you almost start with like an existing uncollectible balance,
right, that
is transferred from SOS.
I think that's a possibility. I think, and this is just for me, yeah, sure, that works fine. I'm just not sure how a retail supplier would feel about that. If they're the retail supplier for this that signs up with the CCA, that now you're gonna purchase my receivables for less because you're gonna kind of include some amount of previous SOS related technicals in there. But I mean, otherwise, I think what you're saying would work. I see another hand. I'm not sure who it is though. Maybe not.
This is Lisa Brennan. I had my hand up.
Oh, hey, Lisa.
Hey, I'm just trying to make sure I understand. It sounds like the third approach, the POR approach, there's an assumption that this will charge Prince George's County customers for Montgomery County bad debt. Can I get some clarification on how that would work? Because I think we made clear it's not our intention of sticking Prince George's with bad debt that it's attributable to Montgomery County.
Yeah, no, I can clarify that. So
Thank
I
you.
don't, and I'm definitely not trying to ascribe any intent or ill will to you guys. I was just trying to lay out kind of
Yeah, I understand. But if
under
that's
these
if
things.
that method ends up with that problem, I just want to understand why it's
Yeah,
how
so
it could
basically,
be addressed.
yeah, so if you think about it, right now, for SOS, basically SOS customers pay an admin charge that covers all SOS write-offs. Okay. If half of the SOS customers go over to the CCA, and then we have to write off some of those CCA formerly SOS customers accounts. If we don't do something special with recalculating how we do the admin charge for remaining SOS customers, those write-offs, to the extent that they were related to SOS accounts receivables, even though those customers are now part of the CCA, those would basically go through the SOS admin charge, which is going to be largely, I guess, Prince George's County customers going forward. So you could end up in a situation where Prince George's County customers are sort of being saddled with the write-offs from customers who have flipped over to the CCA that had delinquent accounts. I think a way to deal with that would be kind of like what Dave Hoppick just suggested, where you say, hey, we're gonna kind of take a portion of the AR or write-offs or something like that and basically have it be included from day one in the POR discount rate, even though, like, understanding that those are not CCA bad debts, but they need to kind of travel with those customers. My concern with that I said back to Dave is just that, the POR discount rate thing is kind of like a transaction between the utility and the retail supplier. And I just don't know if I was a retail supplier, if I would be okay with, you saying, with Pepco saying, hey, we're gonna purchase your receivables at a discount starting day one because some of these customers that are coming over to you have, bad debt from when they were on SOS. So that, and I frankly, I think that that's kind of solved through this transitional method, but there are maybe some other things that make this a little bit more complex. So anyways, I see Jeff has a hand up.
Yes, thanks, Tyler. Three things. The first is that normally I don't want to draw distinctions between utilities with respect to the CCA in particular or in general. But this may be an area where the difference in scale of the problem or of the issue between Pepco and the other two utilities that serve Montgomery County could lead us to having different solutions for BGE and PE on the one hand and Pepco on the other. I'm not saying that that's what I would favor, but I think it's something we need to think about on this issue. The second is that my initial reaction to the choices of methods is that some variation of the POR method may be best because it uses existing mechanisms. It seems to be the simplest and has the least impact. And the CCA is going to be implemented through a retail supplier. So it's a mechanism that seems apt. But my third and final point is that we definitely want to have input from the retail suppliers about that potential choice if we start going down that road. Because on the one hand, as you pointed out, non-CCA retail suppliers may feel that they're being disadvantaged. On the other hand, the CCA is going to be run by a retail supplier. And right now, different retail suppliers, as a practical matter, have different credit histories and they're all mushed together into one discount rate now. So we wouldn't be changing how we approach the calculation of POR in that regard. But we would definitely want to get input from the retail supply community before we went down that, decided for sure and certain to go down that road.
Thanks, Jeff. So I don't have anything else. That was kind of it. I sent out a spreadsheet, but I don't think I really need to go through that. It'll be probably confusing. So
Tyler, I have a couple of questions.
sure.
On the admin charge method, the second one.
Yep.
Do the utilities catch up by the end of year 2? Or is it longer than that?
Do we catch up?
What-
I think I don't. What did I say about catching up? Did I say that there was a timing issue with this one? I can't remember.
Yeah, that initially the utilities would be.
Oh, right, that there would be a reduction in the uncollectible, like which lead into cash under collection.
Correct.
Yeah, and we would definitely catch up by the end of year 2, I would think. And frankly, you know, depending on how we did it, it could be sooner. How you, like in terms of how you do that, the admin charge true up, I would think. So I don't think it's like a horrific timing issue.
Okay. And the billing system changes for the first and the second approaches, are those similar to each other, and do you have an idea about cost?
Yeah, they are similar. I don't have an idea about cost, but I mean, I could find out and get back to the group. I'm not going to offer anything up right now until I talk to somebody, but I would just hope that it wouldn't be significant. Let me put it that way, because
Okay.
it just looks like something, it's like the kind of thing that we you know, I don't know. Let me get back to you on that before I say
Okay.
something I regret.
Okay. Jeff went on record to say that PE prefers the third method. Is there a method that Pepco prefers?
I think I prefer the transitional method. I think it because of how Prince George's and Montgomery County are, it's almost a 50-50 split. I think that, I mean, I kind of have these in order of how I think about them. That's so, I mean, I don't know if we want to take that to the bank as the Pepco, but we could also get back to you and actually do a Pepco ranking, but my guess is we would put them in this order.
Okay. This is a lot of good information, and obviously we're going to have to take some time to think about it, and we may have questions. Should we contact you with questions?
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay.
And if anybody has any other ideas on how to do this, that would be great. I'm not, just I'd be interested.
Okay.
This is Lynn Fiery with BGE. Just wanted to note that the BGE preference out of these three methods would be the third method as well, the POR discount rate approach. And that's largely because of the size of the customers that we have. It avoids that billing system work, but also thinking ahead, if there are more counties that start CCAs in the future, we have a lot of counties in our service territory, and creating this county-specific admin charge kind of on a go-forward basis and over that broader scale would be a little bit burdensome and a lot of extra work. So we'd prefer to avoid that complexity if we can.
Thank you. Okay, so I would ask folks to think about this and take this back to your team, and ask any questions and, be able to discuss this further at the next meeting, especially with regards to the POR discount rate method, the third method, the workarounds for PG County customers. Thank you, Tyler, for the presentation. This is really good.
Okay. I don't know if I'm trying to figure out how to unshare, but
I think I can take care of it.
okay. All right.
Okay, staff. Did you have something you wanted to share today, or did you have something to talk about today?
Yeah, we do have a document to share.
Okay. Let me make you the presenter. Okay. Drew, you should be able to share now.
Okay.
Judge Grace, this is Dave. Can I request a 10, 15-minute break?
Yeah. Do we want to take a half-hour lunch break and come back at 1? Does that sound good to everybody?
That's fine with AOBA, but could I just ask, how long are we planning on sitting today?
Until we run out of something to talk about.
Okay. A half hour would be good.
Okay, let's take a half-hour break and we'll see everybody back at 1, and then we'll hear from staff. Thank you. Okay, welcome back, everybody. It's June 21st, 2022. It's 1 o'clock. We just came back from a half-hour break. Not everybody is back yet, but I figure we'll go ahead and get started. We were going to turn to staff to talk about the document that they just sent around. Everybody should have received it, but hopefully staff can go ahead and share that.
Yep. Can you see it?
Yes, but can you make it a little bit bigger on your screen? Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Yep. So thanks, Judge. So this was just kind of staff's first attempt to identify all the chapters we would need in regulations, all the various COMAR chapters, and what we would need to cover. So just kind of to explain what's here. So we have about 20 chapters. And to the side of each chapter, you'll see where we put numbers in parentheses, or that we need a business plan, or county input. So it's pretty self-explanatory. Some of these regulations we feel we still need some information on the utility and CCA business plan, and just kind of general county input as well for some of these regulations. The numbers in the parentheses refer back to the statute. So in section V of the statute, that's where it lays out all the regulations that need to be covered. So there's, I believe there's 12 of them in the statute. So we kind of put those next to each of these chapters. We think that will cover those requirements from the statute. Yeah, so just getting right into it, I imagine most of the folks on the call are familiar with COMAR regulations. Usually the first chapters here, general and reserved, are just kind of formal and explain. There's not much actually in there to explain anything. It just kind of says what law the regulations are based on. And we did, I should also say, we did pull some of this from the regulations for suppliers. So you'll see 2053 referenced quite a bit. So that is the supplier section of COMAR, retail supply section. So, we're not saying the CCA is a supplier, but I think a lot of those regulations will translate to the CCA, and it will be a good baseline for developing regulations. So the first one we had here was pre-enrollment information. And I should say I also have another document where I tried to add a little more information of what we'll need for each chapter, but I'll bring that up later. I think this first one will help us kind of get us through the chapters first. So pre-enrollment information was the chapter 3 there is the first one we came up with. So we feel we still need the business plan to kind of understand how the information will be passed back and forth between the CCA and the utilities. So, the FTP site that was discussed over several meetings. But some of this information is, pretty straightforward. There is, as it says here, 2053-03 COMAR does have some data on. It does lays out the specifics of what information the utilities may share with suppliers. So, we would be thinking along those same lines. There would be a similar section in here about, what data is shared with the CCA, so addresses, account numbers, utility account numbers, usage data, all that kind of stuff. Now, obviously the bill, as Lisa went over earlier, the bill does say when certain data can be provided to the CCA. So as it noted, aggregated information needs to be provided first, and then once the CCA is established, specific customer information can be sent to the CCA. But so that's the kind of information we're looking for there. Again, I can go into a little more detail later. So pre-enrollment and transfers of service, staff did add some bullets underneath to kind of let folks know what we were thinking, where we needed to go on those chapters. So transfers of service, again, that's pulled from COMAR, from the supplier COMAR as well. And this covers the regulation number 7 in the statute. So again, we need the business plan here as well, with the FTP site, how often data is being shared, when it's being collected, things like that. But so transfers of service is just the opt-in process, the opt-out process, just how customers transfer from SOS and retail to the CCA and vice versa. So that, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Chapter 5 here. Now, these chapters aren't set in stone. I should also say that. So chapter 5 here is just billing. As we've heard, I believe the CCA is going to go with UCB. So it would just explain the processes of utility consolidated billing. Again, there is kind of a baseline we can use in the supplier, COMAR 2053 there for that one as well. And then these next two, 6 and 7, are customer protection chapters for non-residential and residential. So again, we can pull these largely from the supplier COMAR. So we think 5, 6, and 7 here would probably be the easiest to complete as of right now. They're the only ones we don't feel that we need any additional information on. But so the supplier COMAR breaks out non-residential and residential customer protection. So I don't think we see any need to change that here for the CCA. And the one here is just the first regulation listed in the statute, which was about consumer protections. So that's pretty straightforward. Let's see. So 8 through 10 here. The supplier section of COMAR did kind of reserve these chapters for supplier consolidated billing. So I guess it's still unclear whether we want to do that here for the CCA. Obviously, as I just said, they're going to do UCB, but I guess there's nothing against the CCA wanting to change to an SCB sort of format in the future. So we may want to reserve chapters for that, like was done here for suppliers. But we can discuss that a little bit more. So chapter 11 here, we just had the regulations for the application process. So we kind of went over the process and the plan a little bit last week with staff's documents. So it'd be, a lot of that same information in there. But again, we'd probably want some county input on how they see their CCA working, just the various details we'd need to codify there. So chapter 12, the termination procedure. So this one is required by the statute, regulations 10 and 12 there. So again, it's pretty self-explanatory. Just how long will the termination procedure take? How will customers be switched back to either SOS or retail supply? Obviously there's a lot that could go in there. So that's one that's required by the statute. Chapter 13. Again, this one is required by the statute, the second regulation in there, which would discuss the historical usage and forecasting. So I'll just read from the bill directly. There needs to be regulations on the procedures to consider and review the analysis of historical and forecasted trends in electricity prices and a purchasing plan designed to save ratepayers money submitted by the county. So if folks remember from last week when we discussed the aggregation plan, it had a lot of the similar information in it. It had a very similar requirement as here in this regulation number 2. So yeah, so we just need the forecasted trends may be a little difficult to figure out, but we'd be happy to work with the county to figure out where they could pull that data from. And then the purchase plan designed to save ratepayer money would get into the procurement process of the county. How specific that needs to be in regulations, I think we'd have to discuss, but obviously just based on the statute, there need to be some discussion on how the procurement of the county saves ratepayers money. Moving on to 14, there's non-commodity tariff structures. So this is required by number 3 in the bill. So again, we kind of touched on this in the aggregation plan. So again, this is just everything that's obviously not related to the supply of the energy. So any fees, consulting fees, things like that. I don't think this one would be terribly long, but again, we need the county's input on what exactly are they thinking would be in there. What other fees do they think they may be charging? Chapter 15 is data exchange. Again, this one comes right from the regulations, from the statute. So it's really looking for a protocol of the data exchange between the CCA, the supplier that CCA uses, and the utilities. So yeah, I think it's well, again, it kind of feeds into 16 there, data privacy. So data exchange would probably go back to the FTP and any EDI transactions the utilities and the CCA are doing. And then 16 obviously gets into the privacy, you know, what data is being provided and who's storing it, things like that. And that comes from 4 and 8 of the bill. Yeah, so we discussed that in the plan as well. You know, who's going to hold on to the data? Is it the CCA? Is it the supplier? You know, where's that data held for how long? Things like that. So number 5, excuse me. So number 7, chapter 17 here relates to number 5 of the statute. So this specifically gets to transferring load from SOS to the CCA. So this it really goes more to the not just customer switching. This kind of goes more to the kind of the PIP process, which we have in chapter 19, just the bidding process and the procurement of SOS. So this isn't specifically about customers, but just how we're going to handle that process of, you know, the load dropping from SOS to the CCA. And obviously that's still an issue we'll have to figure out. Obviously, it'll be pretty complex. Chapter 18's uncollected cost recovery, which Tyler just went over. That relates to the regulation number 6 from the statute. So again, that one needs to be covered. So I won't go into too much detail on that. Obviously, we'd have to decide of those 3 options Tyler provided, or some folks may come up with about, you know, how exactly we're going to do that. You know, spell it out in the regulations there. SOS risk mitigation. So this is kind of similar to chapter 17. And, you know, review the PIP issues, excuse me. So this refers to chapter 9, regulation number 9 from the statute. So this is, again, is mitigating risk. So, you know, we've discussed if, you know, Montgomery County would have its own SOS and for utility service and things like that. So that one, obviously, we still need to figure out. But again, this chapter would be required by the statute. Then lastly, we put a CCA coordination tariff. So for folks that aren't familiar, you know, there's a supplier coordination tariff that all suppliers must, you know, adhere to when dealing with the various utilities. So we think there probably should be one here as well for the CCA. And again, this comes straight from the statute, where it asks for regulations based on the approval of a tariff structure for the CCA interactions with electric companies. So, you know, this gets into billing, disputes, metering services, PJM requirements, scheduling, utility charges. So to us, that sounded, excuse me, very much like a supplier coordination tariff. So we may think of other chapters as we kind of go along here, but this is where we've kind of started from. Again, we did base a lot of this off of the supplier section of COMAR as well. I guess I'll leave it up for any questions right now. I can move on to my second document, which goes in a little more detail on chapters 3 and 4. I see.
Bev has her hand raised.
Hey, just one thing, the CCA coordination tariff, just being clear, that would be something that Montgomery County would have? That would not be something the utilities would have?
I guess we'd have to think about, I think because the utilities have the supplier coordination tariff.
Right.
I think it would be the same because the statute does specifically spell out the approval of a tariff structure for the CCA interactions with electric companies. So to us, that sounds like, you know, very similar to the supplier coordination tariff. So I'd imagine each utility would have one of the 3 that are impacted. But yeah, you know, open to interpretation on that. But I think that's our kind of first interpretation.
Okay.
So Bev, related to that, you know, I think hopefully there's a lot of borrowing that could be used from the existing supplier coordination tariffs as well.
Yeah, I was trying to, in my head, think if it would be better to have a separate tariff or just, you know, change the existing, since we are largely treating them as another supplier, but yeah, we'll have to think about that.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, let me pull up this other document real quick. Okay, so this is the same document, just with a little more detail, particularly on chapters 3 and 4. So, we didn't want to start breaking it down into sub-chapters just yet. I think we feel that's a little premature since we don't have the full kind of process laid out in front of us, but just to kind of give folks an idea of where we're going and, how detailed the regulations will need to be. We just kind of wanted to, start pointing out what information we need. So I'll just start with the pre-enrollment information here for the chapter 3. So the first bullet here, Lisa did just discuss this going through her document. But I did just want to note that, in the supplier section of COMAR, it does, state that suppliers need consent to receive information, but I just wanted to point out that the bill it's stated specifically that the CCA does not need consent for customer data. So just wanted to point that out in case anybody wanted to bring that up. So we need so a lot of it can be pulled from the statute. The statute is pretty prescriptive, so we can pull out some COMAR based on the statute. Obviously, we'd need to probably make it a little more detailed, but it does give us a decent basis to start off of. So, again, this is an exhaustive list. We just things that came to our minds first. So again, as Lisa already discussed earlier today, there's a requirement in the statute that only aggregated data can be provided to CCA when it initiates the process. So again, we just, have a regulation stating that. Then after that, they can get the customer specific data, but that's only after the aggregation plan is approved. And then what information the CCA may collect. So again, I kind of pulled this from suppliers. So, there's a lot on obviously names, service addresses, account numbers, what rate class, usage data, and things like that. So it is spelled out in the supplier COMAR. So, we would feel that what data exactly is being transferred from the utilities to the CCA would also need to be spelled out in COMAR. And then the information, staff would still need to finish the regulations is, how will the data be provided? Is it EDI or this FTP site? I guess this would probably be EDI or something like that. When, how often, who will receive the information, the CCA, the supplier, and then again, who kind of holds the information, how long is it held, things like that. So before we kind of write the regulations, we kind of want that spelled out. So we just kind of have everything in front of us and then can just move right to the regulations instead of trying to piece it together. So yeah, so that's just some of it. Again, we may add some things here as we move along, but that's what we're thinking for pre-enrollment information. So transfers of service. Again, this is something we'd still want the completed business plan to complete these regulations. But as I stated earlier, this is the transfer to the CCA from SOS and retail. So, we need probably a subchapter on the opt-out procedure and, explaining that whole process, the opt-in procedure, explaining that whole process, how existing, which was brought up earlier today, how existing retail choice contracts interact with the CCA, process for a CCA customer selecting retail choice or SOS. So that was kind of also brought up today that I think the utilities wanted, if the customer called utility to select SOS, the utilities were going to send them back to the CCA to tell them they selected SOS. So that's something we would need in the regulations. So we'd like that process, ironed out. Process for retail choice customers and SOS customers selecting CCA. So yeah, so the back and forth between switching either to the CCA or away from the CCA. How the CCA enrolls the customer. So again, I think this goes back to the FTP process. So, you know, how is the CCA going to check whether a customer has affirmatively selected not to be in the CCA? You know, how will they check if they have a retail supplier? And then, you know, we kind of break that down with the CCA's responsibility. So how are they going to screen this? And what kind of information will the CCA need to convey to the utility, and vice versa? Utility responsibilities, you know, what information will they convey to the CCA? How will they screen customers? And then we also had a section here on notice requirements to the CCA when utility blocks enrollment. So it's kind of what Dave was discussing earlier. How will that process work if the utility needs to block an enrollment to the CCA because the customer just signed up with a retail supplier, just say a day or two prior to that switch to the CCA? So there be any limits to switching? You know, how often can a customer switch in a billing period? Anything like that? There's a section currently in COMAR about, you know, how errors with suppliers is addressed. So, you know, if we have that situation where a customer signs up with a retail supplier a day or two before they're about to be switched on the CCA, but, you know, something happens where they're put onto the CCA, how will that error be addressed? So, you know, we need regulations on all those topics. And so this was just for the initial enrollment, you know, prior to the CCA being fully up and operational. And then post enrollment, we need regulations on the FTP process, the timing of switching. You know, when will the utility update the FTP site? How often will CCA check the site? Things like that. Excuse me, then the utility process timing. So obviously now, you know, the switch to retail supply is 3 business days. So will we have the same timing for the CCA, more or less? Again, so this is all data we would need to fully write these regulations. How often will the CCA send the EDI to the utility for enrollment? What information will be provided to customers on supply choices? So when they move into the service territory, you know, how are we communicating that there is the CCA as well as SOS and retail choice? The CCA drop processes. Can a customer drop at any time? How many switches per month is there? So some states have fees for dropping CCA service. And they also set time periods for when you can switch. I believe in that Columbus example, customers could switch very selectively. But anyway, so we would just need timing on that. And then, so this one was kind of covered in the initial enrollment, but we'd also need it for the post enrollment. So how the CCA enrolls the customer, the screening, and information relay requirements. So yeah, who's relaying information, how often, when, in what format? Again, how will switching errors be addressed? So, so yeah, that's as far as we've gotten for the transfers of service. I'm sure there's more we could add there. We're just trying to point out, you know, what information we would need to fully iron out the regulations. You know, I did try to slightly start to put together a COMAR for the transfers of service. This was very preliminary, just to give folks for the folks who don't know what regulations typically look like. I just tried to make a slight example here, but so I don't know that we need to go over this specifically, but I think we can, like I said earlier, pull a decent amount straight from the statute. So usually there's a first kind of subchapter within the chapter explaining what the chapter applies to. So, you know, again, I pulled a lot of this from the supplier sections of COMAR. So just state that the chapter applies to customer switching from competitive supply service or SOS to the CCA. I put CAA, excuse me, and customer switching from the CCA to competitive supply service or SOS. So then, you know, again, we'd have another subchapter on the initial enrollment. So I first kind of went with the notice that was required in the bill. And then, you can take from the bill what needs to be in the notice. Again, we can add detail to this because this was just taken from the bill. So, for example, we said rates. This probably needs to be expanded to describe what rates and how the rates need to be described in the notice. So yeah, this was just kind of a initial first pass of what it would kind of look like. But so I wouldn't take this terribly seriously, but this, staff is thinking about how to put together the COMAR, what chapters we need, what kind of subchapters, what information we're looking for. So we can continue to fill out this document and the other chapters about what information we're looking for. We're free to take any suggestions on if we've missed anything. Obviously, it's not complete yet, but I'd be happy to receive any feedback on that. But I guess I'll open up for questions so far.
Jeff Trout has his hand raised.
So I think this is a useful beginning. The second document, the one with more detail. And as I listen to the description of all the different things that staff is at least currently thinking need to be filled in, I was mentally drawing a distinction between rules relating to what needs to be done as opposed to how you do things. And outside of the area of consumer protection, generally when we write regulations, we write regulations that say the utility or the supplier will do X. And then we leave it to the utility or the supplier to figure out what's the most efficient way to do X. But we don't write that into the regulation because the answer to the how question can differ depending on the circumstances and can change over time. So a lot of what I heard is stuff that we will need to agree on or try to agree on draft regulations for, but a fair amount of it, I don't think we do need to write regulations for. And it would generally be characterized as to the how stuff, because that is not the kind of thing that you put into a regulation. First of all, because the regulation sets minimum requirements, not operational details, and secondly, because how you do things changes over time.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair comment. Yeah, so I think, I agree with that statement generally. I guess just for example, the utility process timing, yeah, I don't know that we need to exactly spell out how each utility will process the switch. But as you stated, yeah, we'd be looking for a minimum, utilities need, or the CCA needs to process a switch in, 3 business days or something like that. So yeah, I think I'm in general agreement with your comment, Jeff. Yeah, so yeah, like I said, I think I'm in general agreement. But we definitely still need more detail to iron these out. But I agree with you, we don't need to spell out each and every process to the T.
So, nobody else has any questions. Drew, I really appreciate especially the second document because it goes into a level of specificity so that we all know like what decision making we need to do now so that we can get these drafted into the commission and within 6 or 7 months. So I noticed that your chapters 3, 4, 15, 16, and 17 all require the business plan from Montgomery County. And I'm wondering if Montgomery County, like what kind of timeline Montgomery County is looking at to be able to answer these questions.
I'm assuming you're talking about what's sort of been described as the post-transition part of what we just went over. Am I correct? Just that we're all on the same page?
Well, not all of it. I mean, 3 and 4, chapters 3 and 4 are pretty much the exact same action items that were included in your document from today, from lines 2D, 2F, and 2G, which is what other type of data would be required. This is likely to be the same information provided to in retail suppliers, just on a broader scale. And then aggregation data, utilities and county will determine how to provide county level data, and the CCA to determine the opt-out process. So those are the first 3 action items that on the document that you presented today. And those pretty much correspond to what Drew just went through as far as staff's questions that they need answered before they can start drafting chapters 3 and 4, pre-enrollment information and transfers of service. And that's not, none of that is post enrollment.
Right. Maybe I wasn't clear. So when you're talking about the business plan for 15, 16, and 17.
I just noted that 3, 4, 15, 16, and 17 all reference the business plan needed. And so, and that's in contrast to 11, 12, 13, and 14, which are other decisions by the county that we'll need input on. But since I started with the business plan because it was just similar to the action items that you had presented.
Yes, I mean, I know that we still have outstanding sort of the next part of the I'll call it the action matrix that I went over today. So that's that is sort of the post transition process. So for new customers essentially. And we're going to get that largely from the document that the utilities and the county put together. And we're deciding whether or not to add that to the current matrix or make a separate one. It may just be easier to make it one document so it's all in one spot, but we'll see. So I think some of that information is going to be covered by that document. But I just wanted to make sure when you say business plan that we've referred to it differently, and that's fine. We can coordinate on the names at some point, but
Drew, can you scroll up to 3 and 4 where you put the questions that needed to be answered? So I think staff's been asking for a business plan for a few weeks now, and I think to me what this document does that Drew is sharing kind of gives a better idea of the specificity needed in the decision making that's required. And these are a lot of this is something that needs to be worked on by both Montgomery County and the utilities because it's about information sharing and contact between them. So I'm sticking with the documents, everything that we've discussed today. I guess I'm wondering the timing on when Montgomery County is going to be able to work with the utilities to provide more detail as to these types of communications and sharing.
well, I mean, we continue to talk to the utilities. As I said, we've been in touch with them talking about the additions to the document that we gave today. And, without more information being given, we were operating under the assumption that that was going to be useful to staff for what they're doing. So are you saying so I'm saying we went over the document today, the matrix of actions. We're going to do more information for the post-transition. Are you talking about another document altogether, or that staff may need it to be filled out, which we totally understand that it's a living document?
Well, I think so. I think these questions here in pre-enrollment information, staff's chapter 3, are directly related to where you put in the notes on 2D and 2F, the things that still needed to be determined. Right? So that was where this document would be filled out, right? To answer the questions about what data would be required and how to provide county level data and all of that. I think you guys are asking the same questions and I think you're on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the timeline for those notes, for answering those questions?
I don't know that we have considered a specific timeline. Doesn't that get into what Jeff was just saying? Doesn't that get into the how versus the what? Which would be something that would sort of evolve as the processes are fleshed out. I guess I'm
But so I can respond. Yeah, so I guess Lisa, we'd be looking for specifics into your matrix. So yeah, so the 2D where it says any other appropriate billing and electric load data. So, you know, like I was saying in the COMAR for the suppliers, it specifies what exact data the utility could share with suppliers. So we'd be looking for that for the CCA, you know, what I have here, you know, the name, you know, so again, you just spell out each data point you're looking for, the names of the account holder, the account number, service addresses, rate class, you know, do you want usage data, you know, anything else. So that would be spelled out in the regulations. And then like you have on that first page, the last line of the matrix, the scrubbing procedure, you know, CCA will scrub the eligible lists. So I think that kind of goes down to the CCA screening responsibilities. You know, how do you go about that scrubbing process? So yeah, no, it would just be specific, you know, data timing, things like that, data exchanges on the timing on data exchanges and things like that. So I don't know if that helps at all. It'd just be more specific, like hard dates, numbers, things like that.
so yeah, I mean, we know that that's going to be, you know, coming as these conversations continue. As I said, we don't expect this to be a document that's, you know, sort of locked away. But I guess my question is going back to Jeff's comment, is this needed for the regulations? Because the regulations are what needs to happen, not the business details of how it's got to happen.
Well, correct, but the regulations might say, for example, that upon contacting the utility shall provide the CCA with the customer contact within so many hours or whatever. So what needs to happen is Montgomery County and the utilities need to talk about how long the data transfer, how to transfer the data between you all and how long that's likely to take. And then once that's decided, then the decision has to be made. So as to whether there should be an outside time limit that's put into the regulations. But we need to know what the capability is of the system and the conversation between the parties is, and you know what information is going to be transferred to know how specific we need to be in the regulations. And I guess if the action items listed in notes in Montgomery County's document today are things that we all acknowledge need to be decided, but they weren't going to be decided for a while, well, then I don't think that's feasible, because meanwhile, I'm putting pressure on staff to start drafting regulations, strawman regulations for the rest of us to look at. And if we all need to know how this is going to look more specifically in order to decide what to put in those regulations, then those are decisions that need to be made sooner rather than later. David Hoppick has his hand raised.
Yeah, so building on what you just said, Judge, I think another example is the screening, because I think the regulations would need to be pretty specific about how the screening process will actually work and who is responsible for doing what related to screening. If a customer has, selected SOS, if a customer has already selected a retail supplier or is enrolled by a supplier, I think those things are the kind of things that would end up in the regulations.
Yeah, and regulations can be quite specific. There's a lot of spots in the regulation where it says, the data will be sent from the utility or the supplier to the utility through EDI transactions. So it specifically calls out EDI. So, how the data is transferred would also need to be known and things like that. So, the regulations can get pretty specific.
Well, I think that what you provided today will be helpful, especially the second document, if you can send that around.
Sure.
And we'll take this back and, sorry.
Yeah, I just said sure. We'll send it around.
Okay. So we'll take a look at this. It would also be helpful, for staff to take a look at the matrix that we did and let us know if you have specific questions as to what more you need.
Sure. Yeah, we can do that.
Because it would be helpful to know kind of what's done and what's still ongoing. Like I said, we understand the document's going to be a living document, but it would be helpful to know what, if there's anything we can consider sort of moving on.
Sure.
So looking forward to the next meeting. I know that the utilities in Montgomery County are working on either a new matrix or continuing this matrix to post October 2024. But there's a few other things that we all need to work on to be ready to discuss for the next meeting. So it seems like staff can start working on chapters 5, 6, and 7 for drafting regs. Hold on, Robbie Atkins is trying to get in and I have to click a button apparently every time somebody's trying to get in. So it also looks like staff has some specific questions which align with the notes on 2D, 2F, and 2G on the first page of Montgomery County's matrix from today. So it seems like Montgomery County and the utilities might be able to flesh that out further and answer some of those more specific questions of staff on those items, which will allow drafting of chapters 3 and 4 of staff's working regulatory chapters list from today after staff gets to 5, 6, and 7. We all can take a look at the presentation by Tyler today, looking towards being able to ask the appropriate questions and come to some conclusion on the parties' positions on that, so we can see how close we are to a somewhat of a meeting of the minds on that. It occurs to me, Jeff was very outspoken today on what he thought should be included in regulations and what he couldn't. And if Montgomery County and the utilities are going to be talking about chapters 3 and 4 and all of those questions of staff, which correspond to the action items on page 1 of Montgomery County's list, that it might be easy to, while you're having that discussion, to flesh out how you think it's going to work now and what of those things need to be contained inside regulations. So it might be staff and the utilities that need to start drafting a straw man regulations for chapters 3 and 4, pre-enrollment information and transfers of service. I know it's a lot of work to do, but we're rolling at this point. So any reaction? Okay. All right, so questions about Pepco's presentation can be sent to Tyler Wolverton, and we'll hopefully get some reaction as to that from everyone prior to the next meeting or at the next meeting. We'll discuss that. And anything that you think might be even if you're sending questions to Tyler, anything that you think might be beneficial for the group, please copy everyone. We might all have the same questions. And then we'll ask that Montgomery County and the utilities continue to meet regarding a further matrix of actions and also reacting to some of the specific questions and specific notes from page 1 of that. And if you're able to try to start, thinking about what needs to be included in as a draft strawman regulation for 3 and 4, and also further information that we think is the way things are going to go in this case, but may not need to be included in regulations. I hope that makes sense. And staff can continue to work on chapters 5, 6, and 7 of the regulations. They're largely similar to what we already have, but you stated that those might be the easiest to start with, so that's why I'm directing you there. Is there anything else that folks need to we need to start looking at for the next couple of meetings? Okay, well, it occurs to me that this was a great meeting today. Actually, I learned a lot, and I'm feeling really comfortable with the amount of work everyone's doing and the data that we're getting and the specificity with which we're discussing these issues. So I'm very happy. Thank you very much, everyone, for all of your hard work. We're gonna start again at 10 o'clock in 2 weeks. I don't really know what to do about Zoom versus WebEx. Zoom really failed today. If we stay on Zoom, all the meeting codes are supposed to continue to work. I don't know. I'm thinking we'll just go to WebEx for the next meeting. I'll just send out a new invite for WebEx for the next meeting at 10 o'clock. But please try to keep it on your calendar. And if nobody has anything else, then we can be done for the day. Seeing no hands, thank you very much. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.